Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. It's a little bit of a beginning discussion while people are still joining and connecting to audio. And once we see that everybody's kind of getting in, good. I think most of you are connected. Okay, so welcome on the first to the first lecture. The joint lecture between, it's more of a discussion, hopefully, between the Technology Transfer Office of the University of Ljubljana, the Ljubljana University Incubator, and it's also supported by EIT Health. We are three organizations helping out early stage and general innovation in Slovenia. We're super interested in helping everybody who is in research getting out and doing as much as possible in terms of commercializing their stuff. And today is specifically, we're going to be talking about translating your academic results into a successful business. So starting a spin-off, if you will, or a spin-out, depending on how you structure it. And we have a very, very esteemed guest with us coming all the way, or not physically coming, but coming all the way from Harvard, who's going to tell a little bit about himself and their program. And then we'll have a lot of questions, hopefully. And Ursha, please, if you have anything else to say also regarding questions, how that will be handled, and then let's get cracking.
Yeah, well, again, it's also my honor to present and to announce our today's guest, Dr. Michael Fenn. Maybe just a short introduction about him. He serves as a leader of entrepreneurship and innovation within the Harvard Life Science community. He describes himself as a recovering professor and a dedicated serial entrepreneur. And what he is particularly passionate about is bridging the gap between academic research and startup ventures. And this is also the main reason why we invited him, and also probably why he could not resist our invitation. So with this event, we would like to bring entrepreneurship closer to our researchers, and also us, the Incubator and the Technology Transfer Office, to get more ideas how we can facilitate the spin-out creation at the University of Ljubljana, and of course also in other research organizations in Slovenia. So Michael, please start with your presentation and then we'll go with the questions. I will have some of the questions myself, but of course also all of you who is in the audience, you are welcome to ask questions, put them in the chat. And if there won't be a lot of questions, we'll also maybe ask you to ask them live. So please.
I'm going to share. Let me pull these slides up real quick. Hold on one second here. Let's see, I got a lot of things open. Here we go. All right, let me know if you can see those. We're good? All right, great. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the invitation. I guess we're about halfway around the world, but I guess the silver lining of this pandemic that we're in is that we can get together virtually. And I've been doing increasing number of these types of engagements virtually, which is great. Being able to connect with all sorts of folks around the world that are interested in innovation and entrepreneurship, which is what I do at Harvard, leading their Harvard Innovation Labs life science and healthcare programs, as well as a few other programs and activities that I'm involved with in the Boston, Cambridge biotech ecosystem. So what I wanted to do, I'm just going to real briefly, introduce myself. Thanks for the really kind introduction. I'll give a little background on myself and kind of where I'm coming from on the role that I have at Harvard, and then just kind of introduce the programs that we run, that I run, and we, the goal and mission of what it is that we try to do from an innovation and entrepreneurship perspective at Harvard, specifically working with Harvard Medical School, the College of Science and Engineering, as well as the 12 affiliated hospitals in the Boston area that are affiliated with Harvard and Harvard Medical School. So with that, I'll go ahead. So who am I real quick? As was mentioned, Michael Fenn, the Director of Health and Life Sciences at Harvard Innovation Labs. I've been there for a little over a year and a half. Prior to that, I was an assistant professor of biomedical engineering. I have a background in biomaterials, drug delivery, nanomaterials, nanobiointerface. Done a lot of work with diagnostics and biotech, some work on devices. So I've kind of had a pretty broad yet deep background in several different areas. Also worked on several different AI data-driven type of platforms as well. But with that, I've been involved in a number of startups. I was much more interested in building companies and translating technologies, commercializing technologies than actually just publishing papers. Not that there's anything wrong with publishing papers. It's necessary. It helps contribute to the body of knowledge. But as an engineer and as someone that's a builder, I saw that building startups, building ventures was kind of my way of having impact through technology and science. So I had built several successful startups that we launched out of my lab, one that we sent to Y Combinator early on that did really quite well. Recently just was acquired actually 2 months ago for a diagnostic platform for NASH, and then helped design and develop some technologies that we would spun out into several other companies, including a cell therapy and cell therapy processing device for adipose stem cells, among several other technologies. Then took this job at Harvard and really enjoyed it. My role at Harvard is supporting all of the Harvard life science entrepreneurs in any way that we can. And also I'm going to talk here about some of the programs that we have for that. But what that can mean for me is, designing and developing programming such as workshops, bringing in speakers. But a lot of what I do is just advising, mentoring these founders, these aspiring entrepreneurs and scientists in terms of being able to help them build a viable venture, depending on what that is that they're looking to do. So that could be from the technical standpoint where, maybe I have expertise, I can dive in deep. Otherwise, it could be from business development, strategy perspective, IP portfolio construction. But a lot of what I do is networking and playing connector role. And I think that's really, and I'll talk more about it when we get to kind of the Q&A part, about what's important in terms of being able to build strong ventures, strong startups, and having a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem. It's really the community, it's the people in that community. And I'll talk more about that. And I think at Harvard Innovation Labs, I think it's the single most important asset or resource that we have is our community and the people that we have working within our community. Advisors, external mentors, specialists, EIRs, the alumni community that we have, just fantastic. We have an extraordinary network of venture capital investors that we work with. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, and I think some of my thoughts and ideas of how to better interface academia with these types of ecosystems and with these types of people, and really how academia is kind of the foundation of these most successful ecosystems, such as that you see here in the Boston Cambridge area, as well as looking, say, maybe at Silicon Valley and then some of the other areas where we've seen really quite successful innovation ecosystems. So with that, I just want to introduce Harvard Innovation Labs. We have a couple different programs, been around for about 7 years now. We have kind of 3 primary programs and then a few other new programs. So our primary program is our venture program. This is kind of our flagship, largest program. This is mainly targeted for in my case with health and life sciences, it's mainly PhD students, postdocs, residents, research fellows, often working with faculty on building very early stage ventures, often idea concept phase, developing that proof of concept, maybe executing those initial killer experiments. Stage wise, pretty broad, could be, again, from kind of just an idea all the way through to, they've raised, a couple $100,000, maybe up to $1 million in seed funding. So again, really pretty early. The types of technologies, everything from cell and gene therapy, something that I'm particularly interested in, small molecule therapeutics, medical devices of all kinds of different diagnostic platforms, and then everything digital health, data-driven health IT, health administration types of technologies that you could possibly think of. So it's very broad in scope. These founders are coming from, again, the medical school. They're coming from the Wyss Institute. They're coming from all of the hospitals, the Brigham and Women's, Mass General, Dana-Farber, you name it, top hospitals in the country in their respective areas. So it's really interesting. the types of technologies and the types of people I get to work with coming out of some of the, the top labs working on cutting edge science. We also have an accelerator program called Launch Lab X. Actually, applications are open right now. This is specifically for Harvard alumni. Harvard alumni founded ventures, pretty competitive program. We have I think we got about 300 and some odd applications last year. We selected 12 companies. They get to move in, free space, no equity that we take on that. We actually don't take equity on any of these companies. We don't take an equity stake in any of these companies. We don't actually take IP ownership either, although we do work with Harvard's Tech Transfer Office, Harvard's Office of Technology Development, who do obviously have a role in intellectual property that comes out of Harvard, which is then licensed back to these founders who are often the inventors. And we can help facilitate and help guide them through their intellectual property portfolio needs. And then lastly, one of my favorite things about what we do in the program that we have is the Pagliuca Life Lab. This was built about 3.5 years ago with a donation from Steve Pagliuca and his family. It's a 15,000 square foot wet lab incubator space in addition to the 35,000 square feet of co-working space that we have. Really a beautiful space. It's run in partnership. We have a great partnership with Lab Central, which also has their for-profit arm, BioLabs, based in Kendall Square. It's kind of the premier life science incubator in the world. They have over 100,000 square feet. And I think they've incubated well over 100 companies now, raising upwards of $10 billion in funding over the course of the last 5 years, since they've actually probably far more than that at this point if you include the IPOs. And so it's really a fantastic partnership to have with Lab Central, which is a nonprofit entity that was started with some state funding here in Massachusetts for incubating early stage life science companies right in the center of Kendall Square. And this has really been, I think, crucial to the development as a place for companies to be able to spin out, yet still somewhat be in the university nest, if you say, in the safety net of the university, before they really leave, allowing them to de-risk and create additional value before they have to go out in the real world and do it on their own. And then we can obviously help them find, their own lab spaces as they grow. But we want to provide this space, like in partnership with Lab Central as we do, to be able to really de-risk these companies, allow them to do riskier things by doing so for several years, and not have to worry about, bankrupting themselves potentially because they've invested, all of their own personal money into, potentially a triple net lease or something like that. So again, I've kind of talked about the venture program. We run this 3 times a year. We've got some grant funding for the students. We divide this up into kind of the earliest of stage and the later of stage. Typically, the Build It program is a little bit later of stage. These companies all have some source of funding, whether that's some kind of federally funded grant, such as SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grants, or it could be some type of venture investor seed funding on the order of a few $100,000, maybe up to, like I said, $1 million. And at any given time, we probably have around 150 ventures. This is across all areas of industry. I'm typically overseeing a portfolio of about 30 to 40 health and life science ventures, composed of about a third of the companies that we're helping support. President's Innovation Challenge is really great. This is kind of our end of year big pitch competition. We just had this last month. We gave away $500,000 in prize money, which isn't a ton of money, but really the exposure that we're able to provide is tremendous to these companies. Give them a little bit of capital, no strings attached, equity-free capital, and get these companies off the ground, as well as having, a large cohort of our investor friends come and join, who are also there to watch the pitch competition, which we actually broadcasted live this time virtually. Again, the Alumni Accelerator, it's a really great program designed specifically for alumni. It's 9 months long as opposed to the typical 3 months that you often see with accelerators. No equity, and then there's also some funding available through an award process as well. The Pagliuca Life Lab, I think, though, is kind of really our central focal point when it comes to biotech and life science companies. We run application cycles throughout the year. Again, 15,000 square feet of this wet lab space. We've got 18 companies. I think actually that is now 19 companies, and will be 20 companies by the end of the month as we move in. Again, which is getting close to kind of our maximum capacity, which is fantastic. We provide up to 3 benches for these companies. They do pay rent, a nominal fee for rent, of course. It's about half what you would pay if you were to go to some of the other facilities in the Kendall Square or Boston area. But it's a fully outfitted lab. You have access to all the resources, has all the equipment that you would need for cell culture, cell molecular biology, et cetera. In addition to that, you also have access to all the core facilities and core laboratories at Harvard through a contractual agreement, as well as through several CROs and CDMOs as per needed. And, I think really what makes it, though, is, again, our partnership with Lab Central, the community that they're able to create, the pipeline that they're able to create, that they're larger, and a pathway to their larger facility where you can have, obviously, more than 3 benches and a private suite. We do have one private suite lab facility with a company that's been there for about 2.5 years, that's raised about $20 million. And so we're really here, again, to kind of provide the full spectrum from start to, say seed Series A type of fundraising round for these companies as they grow and they bring on additional employees, and then we get them ready to move out on their own, and we'll help them and assist them with any of the needs that they have in terms of finding their own space, building out their own lab, renting their own space, or oftentimes moving to Lab Central's larger space that they have in Kendall Square. This is kind of a spattering of some of the companies that we have. I should probably update this. So there's actually a number of new companies, but and I don't have Akuos on here, but we have, again, kind of everything you could think of: diagnostics, cell therapies, gene therapies, just a whole variety of really interesting biotech and life science device diagnostic companies. Akuos was, I really need to add that, one of the earliest companies that we incubated recently. Maybe some of you have seen Akuos, which is a gene therapy for hearing loss types of disorders. They just IPO'd on the U.S. market. They originally filed, I think, for $115 or $125 million IPO. They actually ended up raising $215 million in their IPO, which is fantastic. And so, it's really, this is the idea, is that we're able to help these, really innovative technology platform, often type companies, be able to incubate, de-risk, work on this, cutting edge technology in a space where there's kind of a safety net, and be able to really provide them the resources that they need to develop their assets or develop their platform, partner with the right investors, partner with the right biopharma partners from the local Boston biopharma ecosystem, which is, of course, as about as concentrated as it can get, and then be able to get them prepared to move out and be as successful as possible, such that you can go raise an IPO with 185% value. Additionally, we also have our own internal venture fund as well, the Alston Venture Fund. It's a small fund doing small checks, but again, the idea being that we have some means to provide capital to these companies. We're providing, pre-seed funding, essentially anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, $150,000 check sizes, typically on a safe note, on a safe with no cap, no discount. We offer this to full-time students, postdoc fellows, residents, etc. And we do this in partnership with several well-known, big-name VCs who act as our LPs and/or investment committee, such as from Bain Capital, Polaris Partners, _VC, etc. General Catalyst, some of the big names that you may have heard of in the VC world. This is for funding all types of ventures, not just health and life science, although health and life science companies have been about 50% of those that we've funded thus far since we've had the fund over the past year or so. Also have grant funding opportunities. They're equity-free grant funding opportunities. Again, capital is just kind of part of the resources that we are able to provide. So space is obviously important to have place for the startups to work and incubate, co-working space, wet lab space. Capital is extremely important as well. So we like to be able to provide small grants on a need base, no strings attached, no equity. And we typically award around about $1 million per year in non-dilutive funding to the teams, which is a nice addition to have, kind of on a need-based, rolling basis they need. This is another thing that I'm working on, which is really great. We were originally going to replicate the wet lab that we had at Harvard Medical School right within the medical school itself, but we've decided to do this a bit differently. A $200 million donation from Lynn Bavatnik was provided back in 2018 and we're building out a new translational biotech incubator, which is actually going to be focused on slightly earlier, more like projects, or what we call protocos, companies that are just before they actually become companies. These are high potential specifically therapeutic focused technologies and platforms that can be brought out of top labs with the highest potential to be able to translate and commercialize these technologies. We brought on one of the world leading drug hunters from Alkermes previously at Alkermes, Mark Namchuk, to help lead this program. I've been leading the process of the build out and construction of the space, as well as developing with Mark some of the programming that we'll have to be able to help PIs working with industry, working with a biopharma, interfacing with them directly to really understand what their needs are, and then also providing training opportunities for postdoc and faculty in terms of drug development and venture creation. And so this is kind of a really interesting interface at the interface of venture capital, the interface of academia, the interface of industry, where we're able to work and not only translate great technologies and based upon the needs of biopharma or the interest and needs of venture capital, but also being able to provide great training opportunities around drug development and venture strategy for our trainees and also for our faculty, which there's been an increasing demand as a means to have impact. Been a little bit delayed because of COVID in terms of doors opening, but we'll see how this plays out. Hopefully things pick back up soon. It's going to really add to our translational and commercialization efforts and capabilities that we have, having an additional 10,000 square feet of wet lab incubation space and co-working space. These are just some renderings of the design that I've been working on. I run workshops throughout the week. This is another thing I think that's really critical, is bringing together community, especially in the virtual world, having these events to bring people together, bringing in really high impact speakers, high profile speakers, but also, in a very much of a discussion format, bringing founders together to be able to discuss topics, relevant to building a venture, things that, oftentimes highly technical founders struggle with, like, commercialization strategy, product development, IP strategy, regulatory and reimbursement questions and strategy, clinical strategy, how to build an R&D pipeline. All of these things we address. Essentially what we've done with this workshop series that we run each week, broken down a pitch deck that you would typically find, say, for a biotech company. And each week we talk about essentially the topic that you would find on a single slide and really focus and drill down to that topic in a very experiential and conversational manner, often bringing in some of the leading experts in the respective fields and areas. This is just a summer program. We run a program in partnership with the National Science Foundation. This is really interesting, and this is something to, I think that we could talk more about. It's funded by the National Science Foundation, but it's really about customer discovery and teaching engineers and scientists how to get out of the lab and go do customer discovery to really understand unmet need, right? And so what this forces scientists and engineers to do, get out of the lab, and as opposed to approaching your technology translation process from a solution seeking a problem, this is really understanding a problem first and then going and finding that solution, right? And this kind of forces you to do that and teaches you a really nice systematic process to do so. Other resource that we have a big maker studio with a bunch of 3D printers, AR, VR studio with a whole bunch of toys. But again, I think the best resource and the most important resource in any of all of this is the people. Having great people, having really knowledgeable people that understand the mission, that are interested in innovation, that are there to do it, not out of interest of themselves, but are there to do it for the greater mission of creating and sustaining a top-notch innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem that we have in the Boston area and at Harvard. And this is everything from people like myself, staff advisors, but also entrepreneurs in residence, investors in residence, founders in residence. We have a number of top mentors. These are often executives, former executives or current executives of Fortune 500 companies. We have specialist office hours, such as attorneys, IP attorneys, corporate structuring attorneys, et cetera, that can come in. They'll do pro bono work, often alumni affiliated with Harvard or with the program. as well as bringing in a number of experienced entrepreneurs and investors. Again, we have a network of several hundred investors, top-notch investors, especially from the life science world. I work with a large group of venture capital and angel investors from life science who are seeking early-stage investment in a very mutual, reciprocal, the dynamic type of way to be able to provide value in two directions for both myself, my founders, but also for them and working in them, again, building very, very strong relationships with these people such that it's not transactional, but it is for really the greater mission. Let's see. Yep. So we have events all the time. Feel free to check these out. Some of these events are open to the public. So, if you'd love to join, please come check it out. We do all kinds of speaker events. Last night I had a fireside chat with Faridun Firuz, who's the former CEO and president of EMD Serono and founder of Gurnett Point Capital. And then we have the vice president of BD for Vertex joining us on Monday morning. So, trying to bring in folks who can talk about really relevant, interesting topics such as partnering as a startup, partnering with life science corporate biopharma companies. All right, so that's kind of it, and that was maybe the long-winded approach, but that's kind of the idea of the program. But I know that we had some topics and questions that I could answer, and I'd love to. You had sent over some questions that I thought were really interesting and very salient to some of the efforts that I'm currently undertaking and that we're always working on. Whether that's in regards to building companies out of the academic lab, something I've personally had experience with, both successfully and not successfully, and also on the broader topic of innovation ecosystems and what I think is most helpful to help build and support such innovation ecosystems. So with that, I'll open it up.
Okay, great, thank you. So I see we have one question from our audience, Tomasz Bizak, I think. Yeah. Tomasz, would you be ready to say it out loud, or should I read it?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Firstly, thank you for this wonderful introduction into your activities. I have one question.
It's a bit hard to hear.
It's impossible to hear, Tomasz.
Yeah, I can't hear.
Yeah. Okay, then I'll read it.
Is this the question here? I can read it. Is that
in
fine?
the chat, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll read it. Let's see. There's a misconception that biotech companies need millions of dollars. They do in later stages. However, you have these seed funds, 10 to 100K on top of on what type of activities can these funds be spent? Yep. Okay. So in terms of funding, number one, in terms of size of funding that's required, and then two, can we generalize, or are there some specific activities where this amount of money can be spent most effectively? No, that's great. Okay. So no, I mean, this is really interesting, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot that you can do with, a few $100,000 in capital if you have the infrastructure in place to help support that, right? And so, I mean, this is exactly why we offer, these types of funding opportunities, a few $100,000 to be able to get in and do those killer experiments, those proof of concept experiments that need to be done early on to really validate, is this something that you should even be working on? Right? Is this something that actually has the viability and feasibility to be able to turn it into a venture? And you should be able to do those experiments with a few $100,000. Even if those are in vivo animal experiments, you should be able to go execute those experiments, know what those are, and plan those out, right? And this is kind of where the big difference between academic research and building a venture really kind of divides off, right? Is you need to be biasing no-go. Right? Which is, in other words, in academia, you're always biasing go deeper into the science to discover more and more and more. With venture building, it's very much the opposite. You need to be biasing, what's my hypothesis and how can I kill that hypothesis? I'm going to try to do everything I can to break this hypothesis and show that it's not in fact feasible and it's the right hypothesis. Right? Once you come to the conclusion that maybe you are not able to break this hypothesis, you're not able to kill this hypothesis through your particular solution that you're proposing, then maybe you're onto something. Right? It's the scientific method, essentially, right? But your failure to disprove, essentially, right, is kind of the green light to go ahead. And that's really how we approach this, right? And again, with $100,000, $150,000, $200,000, if you have the lab infrastructure, such as what I showed with Life Lab, where you have a cell and molecular biology facility, you can work with the core facilities at Harvard or at the local university to be able to execute these experiments and design very efficient and effective experiments. And the way to really know what those experiments are is to talk to, I mean, who, you know, it's like customers, right? Who are your customers in that case? Those are venture investors and or it's the biopharma industry. So if you're trying to solve a particular problem, you should be able to go. If you're trying to solve, say, a particular, you're working in oncology, and let's say there's a particular pathway or a target that you're trying to design, say, a small molecule therapeutic for, right? Or there's some biology in a particular area. You need to go talk to biopharma or venture investors and say, hey, is this interesting biology? Does this make sense? Is this something that sounds like it fits in the portfolio or it fits in the areas of which you're interested in, for which then I'm going to go design these small molecule therapeutics around. And then that helps guide the problem of which you're solving, right? Maybe there's a challenge with being able to screen these particular types of therapeutics, do the chemistry, whatever it might be, the biology. You should be able to go answer those questions and understand what the right questions are. You're asking the right questions, and then you're then testing the hypothesis around those questions with the right experiments to be able to prove or disprove whatever that hypothesis is, right? And you're trying to do that in the most efficient way possible, so you don't spin your wheels. The other part is right, can we generalize, yeah, so I mean, the most efficiently, again, I mean, you know, what that is, it comes down to like the granularity of experimental design, right? So but you have to ask, like, what are the right experiments from a multifaceted, multidimensional perspective, right? It's not just what's going to give me the answer from a scientific perspective, right? You have to also be asking, like, does this target biology make sense? Is this something, you know, if this is the right target biology, okay, and I'm designing protein therapeutics or let's say cell therapeutics, is it feasible from a manufacturing perspective? Is it feasible from a reimbursement and regulatory perspective? What would the clinical trials look like? What are the endpoints? Are these even endpoints? Do we have endpoints? Do we know what the biomarkers are? How much effort's going to be required to design the assays, right? You have to ask all these questions up front from point A to point B, just like you would any other product development, right? And so then with knowing that and having that strategy and plan in place, you build your experiments that are going to get you to those next milestone inflection points to really understand yes or no, right? I don't know that there's a perfect template to it. I wish there was. I mean, even for therapeutics, which people have done many, many times over, it's really challenging, even for small molecule therapeutics, right? Once you get to things like cell and gene therapies and innovative new modalities, it becomes even more challenging, right? But again, I mean, this is why this is so hard, and the failure rate is what it is. But again, we try to lower that threshold, right, and really increase that activation energy to get more shots on goal, but also those places, those friction points where failure often occurs or planning isn't occurring, by going out and talking to key opinion leaders, the physicians, the folks who are actually treating these patients, who understand the problems in the clinic, right? Doing all of this beforehand and having a clinical strategy while you're still in the early discovery phases, not even preclinical, is something that many people don't actually, they think, well, why do I need to think about what a phase 3 clinical endpoint would look like? Well, because it's literally what you're designing this thing to do, right? So anyway, that's kind of my advice on that. I think you can do that with that kind of limited amount of money. And we've seen it before. Actually, I mentioned Akuos, and that was actually an excellent example of, with a few $100,000, a company that has really taken a very innovative gene therapy all the way through to IPO and is in clinical trials now. All right, let's see, or will be starting clinical trials. Next question. What's the next question? Do we have one here? Sorry.
This was a great answer, by the way. Thank you.
It's a long-winded answer, I guess, but hopefully got it. Let's see. Should I just take this next question here? There's one from Mohammed.
I don't know, Masha, will Mohammed maybe read it out loud, or?
Yeah, maybe Mohammed, you can unmute yourself and maybe you can ask a question.
Yeah. Okay. If everybody can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Well, first of all, Michael, thanks very much for a very interesting presentation. Obviously, an abnormal level of spin-outs and activity at Harvard. And I do have some connections there, so I also had some sense, but not have a better sense now after your presentation as to the magnitude of the effort. So I was really actually interested on, given that you have such a rich experience in terms of spin-outs from a whole range of technologies, that you mentioned. I was kind of interested in the sort of key learnings that you have captured over the years with regards to factors or elements that, you know, would help to prepare for a good spin out, but not only that, the success downstream. And actually also linked to this would be just a sense, it would be good to have what is your sense or experience so far in terms of attrition, you know, how many of these spin outs last and how many actually get to a point where they just have to stop?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. You touch on a couple really, really important topics. You know, the first, like, factors for success, right? I mean, number one and by far and away, it's people, it's the team, right? You've got to build a great team. You've got to have a good team early on. You've got to know who you need to build that team, both from an expertise standpoint, obviously, right? Having great technical expertise is extremely important. Having complementary expertise is extremely important, but just generally good chemistry, which is actually the hardest part. And I don't mean chemistry in the lab. I mean people chemistry, right? I mean, can you get along? Will you be able to go through really tough challenges, likely ending in failure, which I think kind of goes to the second part of what you said. Will you be able to survive these types of challenges, and, you know, knowing that it's going to be tough, right? And you want to be with people who are, one, really committed, really passionate, that obviously have a deep understanding and appreciation for the technology and the technical aspects, but also understand what it takes to go from the lab bench to market, right? Or as they say, you know, patient bedside, but really, you know, market. And really understand and want to be part of that mission. And I think that's extremely important. So people, number one, right? And it's the hardest thing to build. Again, you know, talk about not having a template. I could probably build you a template to maybe plan out how to build a life science company. I have no way of building a template to build a really top-notch team that's going to be, you know, that's going to rock every single time. That's the hardest thing to do, the hardest variable to control for. You know, so obviously people, great science. I think leading science first is critical. You have to really be committed to being science forward, founder forward, and science forward, right? And really having the founders have scientific understanding, complemented by somebody who understands the business, but who really truly appreciates the science. And I think that's absolutely critical to building really good companies that are you know, have a high likelihood of success. If you look at these companies that are most successful, you know, the other thing is, are you really meeting an unmet need, right? You're not doing a me too, right? Is this truly an unmet need? And really understanding the need, being able to stratify. I mean, if you're developing, you know, I'm talking a lot about therapeutics, right? But I mean, that's what we work on a lot. I can, you know, talk about medical devices, digital health, whatever, right? But do you really understand the patient segment and patient population that you're going after? Have you really segmented that? Have you gone out and talked to the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, the physicians who are treating these people, the physicians who are doing these tests or using these devices, to really understand not just what the unmet need is, but is this something that, like, they're actually willing to adopt, right? You could go develop the device that cures all cancer, but if it doesn't fit into the clinical workflow or insurance isn't willing to cover it, doesn't matter, right? So you really got to figure out all the stakeholders' interests, and does it actually meet the need, but is it actually adoptable as well, right? So it's kind of a two-part value proposition. And then lastly, you know, I think there's probably two other pieces. Intellectual property, you got to have very strong intellectual property. You know, making sure from the start that you write your claims and the patents that are going to match to the need that you're trying to solve for, and whatever the particular indication of therapeutic areas. And then second, you know, strong IP, I can't stress enough, having, you know, really strong, well-written IP. And then second to that, of course, is going to be, you know, capital. You got to have capital. You got to have value-added capital. I think that's very important. You know, not just taking money from anywhere, but taking, you know, value-added capital at the early stages. Don't dilute yourself out, because ownership and the psychology of ownership is extraordinarily powerful. It's something that I think also lacks in academia, and something that could be solved for. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. Can I just make a comment?
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, so really, yeah, fabulous response there, actually. And of course, like a lot of things in life, people are at the core of it. You know, if you don't get the team right, then things can be more difficult and more challenging than you might expect. So just on your last point about don't dilute yourself. So that's a thing that's really, you know, fairly common, and a common experience with spin-outs from academic institutions, where the academics start to feel very disheartened that as the processes and the spin out and the company commercialization, project is going forward, they tend to get. So how is that controlled? Is it just a matter of getting funding that doesn't come with strings attached, or is there other ways of managing that?
So it's not don't dilute yourself, right? But it's that everybody involved in this process has to understand one another's incentives, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the better you can align, and this is the gap, in my opinion. The gap, they talk about the proverbial, translational gap. The gap is a misalignment of incentives, right? You have investors or you have industry on one side, right? Mm-hmm. And those are two different buckets. And then you have academia on the other side. The problem with that, though, is even within academia, you have a gap there because you have the interest of the faculty, the PI, the inventor, and that of OTD, right, or tech transfer, right?
Right.
Now, given, I think our OTD office at Harvard does a fantastic job. I truly do. I still think that there's a gap in terms of creating that sense of ownership. And if you don't have that, like you're saying, right? I mean, in the US, the way it works is, it's a third, right? You end up with a third maybe amongst all of the inventors to split among themselves in terms of what they own, right? Okay, well, that's great. And then till you go raise that first round of serious funding, right? And you actually do a priced round and it converts to equity. And well, you went from a third, right, to, 15%, right? And so how can you really create a sense of ownership? Now, with that said, I want to counter my own argument and say, hey, it's a lot better to have 1% of $1 billion than 100% of zero, right? Yeah. And so I think there's two sides to this coin, and this is where aligning. It's not one side or the other, and I think this is where on the academic side you have to understand that the only way these things happen is through the deployment of huge amounts of capital, very risky capital, right? That has a high cost of capital, right? And that's because of the risk associated in the long-term time horizons that we're talking about. And so over the process of time, you're going to get diluted. Yes, that's okay. But if you get diluted really early on and you lose that sense of ownership, where's your motivation, right? And so there's a balance. I don't know how to fix that necessarily, albeit it's something that I'm very actively in discussion and talking about all the time. So,
fine. I guess part of it is really managing expectations at the outset, and just the way you explained it, to think about things and get the mindset right as well. Yeah.
You got it. Managing expectation from the start. This is where I think the training, and teaching of both sides, right? Like what really motivates people. And I talked about this last night with Farah, right? Understanding people's motivations is as important as anything that there is. And if you can align people's motivations and incentives and what their purpose is that drives them, then your chances of success really, I think, increase. And I mean, this is where, if you can train, the postdocs and the young faculty and even, the older faculty, doesn't matter. But where are these incentives? What are they? And how can we better align? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. We don't have much more time, so maybe one last question. Do we have time?
Yeah, no, go ahead. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So my question would be, obviously you have a great ecosystem in place, and it seems quite easy from our point of view, but we are kind of at the beginning of this path, and we don't really have a lot of spin-outs, a lot of success stories. So what would be your suggestion to or advice to us as, starting this and building this ecosystem? And also my second question would be, what are the opportunities to maybe lean onto, your ecosystem, or how maybe Slovenian researchers can use some opportunities in US? Maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think those go hand in hand. I think having a strong connection to those ecosystems that, are kind of the leading ecosystems. And I'm going to be honest, I have not always lived here in Boston in the world leading ecosystem of biotech, right? I lived in Florida in a little town, right, where, I helped build an incubator, that was very small and had, 7 or 8 companies in it, right? And that was like all the companies in the entire, county, right? What I think is important, and where I went to university as well is working on this. And they have a relatively strong, University of Florida, they have a relatively strong, tech transfer office, big university, great hospital, right? They have an incubator, but they're still not outstanding, right? They still haven't grown past that. They've kind of been stuck in this plateau, right? And I think what it takes is don't try to be great at everything, right? If you just don't have you got to allocate the resources correctly. So what is it that, your university, and I think it really does. It starts with the university. What is it that you can really be best at, right? There's probably a couple verticals where like you probably lead the world. Maybe you have like world leading researcher and, A, B, or C, or what is that area that you can really be a world leading expert? And then through that, you build a conduit, of communication, pipeline, and collaboration with these areas, like the Bostons, the Silicon Valleys, et cetera, that, they just have the resources. They've been doing it for a lot longer, right, to kind of do everything. And where do you fit in to provide that niche, right? I think that's really something that's critical to understand, is like, what is your niche and how can you really, use that to become the best in the world as an ecosystem. The other thing is, you got to have capital, you got to have talent, right? And I think, so the university is obviously important, I think, as a foundation, if you look at any of these ecosystems. The other thing is having, capital. And that doesn't just mean investment capital. You got to have the local and other levels of government involved. It's really got to be a kind of a tripartite agreement between, university, academia, local government, and then industry, right? And it's all got to, again, be for the understanding that the mission and the longer term goal, it's not these acute timelines of benefit, it's these longer term goal of really building this innovation ecosystem that can be sustainable and benefit all of those stakeholders and players, right? And so I think having that, and then being able to, through that and or vice versa, be able to attract, the right talent, the human capital, which is extremely important. And again, probably one of the bigger challenges.
Thank you. Now Jakob has a question.
Yeah, sure. So what's your experience about academics as founders or as entrepreneurs? We see that they're often, they most often expect that we will help them find a team to run the business and so on. And that can be obviously very difficult. And is that realistic? And when does it become realistic? Under what circumstance?
Yeah, this is what we do, right? I think why would it not be realistic, right? Let me say this. I don't think that most faculty want to run a business, right? I don't think they're actually probably well suited to do it, to be honest. And I don't think it makes a ton of sense to even really train them to be CEOs, right? That really doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to go train highly technically inclined, talented scientists to become CEOs necessarily. There are plenty, that have shown that they can do it, but that's actually a pretty small group. So and this is actually what we're working on at building a training program at the medical schools. How can we train these folks to be really good scientific co-founders, scientific advisors? Again, how to understand the incentives of the other side and how to work along those incentives, leverage those, those motivations of the other side and your own, to be able to really, what drives you, what's your purpose, which is often impact, right? It's having impact through the research that you're doing, through the science that you're creating. And so I think, someone said it was managing or setting expectations early on. So I think if you can do that, I think it makes sense. Now, with that, again, is it reasonable to train or to turn faculty into, executive types that run business? No, I don't know that that's maybe the route to go. This is where human capital is important, is to pull in the right people at the right time who can lead that business, right? But still having, still allowing for significant feeling of ownership from the faculty side. And this is why being science first, the science first approach, I think, is so important. Does that help to kind of make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because the faculty's job is to contribute to the body of knowledge and, do science for the greater good. But in the end, also, the job there is to build things that help society, and that's not done through the basic research type of pathway often, right? There's basic and translational, and I think we need both, obviously. But if you want to do translational work and see your work, have impact directly, through your own efforts, I think there needs to be. I think there's also some challenges with and some myth to the idea of conflict of interest. I think the concerns around academic freedom infringement and things. I think that those can be well mitigated, and I think that's been done. I think there's strategies to do that. And I think if, being in academia, I think we're kidding ourselves if we believe that academia is truly, on this pedestal of, of a complete removal of bias or mitigation of such kind of conflicts, right? I don't think that's the case where, often it's, industry, they're all very biased and have these conflicts, and, they're only interested in one thing. And I think that's actually not the case. Maybe that was the case at some point, I don't know, but I think that's actually not truly the case. I think, again, it's really understanding what motivates one another. But I don't know.
Okay.
That's just my opinion.
Kind of a follow-up question. What would you say, because often I see that, teams that are hired to take over academic projects have to be hired. How about in a setting where you don't have that much capital to deploy? Where,
compensation.
Tens of thousands is hard.
Yeah, compensation is a huge problem, right? I mean, in tech transfer offices, you see this. This is why, in tech transfer offices, you see high turnover, right? You go hire these really brilliant folks to work in tech transfer, have these great skill sets, and then they get scooped up. We see it here, right? They get scooped up by pharma, who can go pay them, 3 times the salary, 2 times the salary, right? It's hard, but again, I mean, there's an equity compensation component, right, that can actually be quite attractive, and if you provide that equity compensation for faculty, if you provide that equity compensation for the other stakeholders, right, and if those are people that you're bringing in from outside to be executive management, right, you're setting up the right incentives. And if these are people, you've got to find the right people who are willing and really able to be able to operate in that kind of environment, right? I mean, if they're looking for a paycheck, multi-$100,000 a year paycheck, and not to be compensated in equity, well, then maybe they're not the right person to be running that kind of business, right? Maybe you need to find somebody that is more entrepreneurially minded, and not just minded, but capable, right? That has the has the cushion, I guess, to be able to do that, right? So I think that that's a challenge that even a place like Harvard faces.
Okay, next we have quite a complex question. Maybe you can take a look at it. If not, maybe we can answer it afterwards. It's quite concrete.
Let's say CRISPR, I need to start. But if I want CAR-T, I need to
maybe we can do it later on. If it's...
Yeah, this is a great question. There's a lot of pieces to this to kind of dive into. It is a highly multifaceted approach. It's not that there's no templates. There's definitely templates for doing diligence, right? I mean, you can. There are plenty. I can send you templates to do your diligence, right? To dive in and really define your unmet need, and to look at reimbursement, and to look at to do a risk-adjusted net present value calculation, and all of those fun things that you can do, right? And you can model it, and you can collect all the data, and you can build a big competition landscape analysis, right? And find the holes and the missing gaps, right? And I mean, that's kind of part of what you have to do, and look at risk versus reward, and really understand time horizons and capital allocations and how all that plays together. That's, I think, building a template for something like that that's 2 variables isn't possible, right? It's a highly multidimensional, multivariable type of thing that you have to look at and kind of weight yourself. So but I'd be happy to talk more on that. I think these 2 technologies, gene therapy, CRISPR types of technologies, CAR-Ts, extremely interesting, a lot to be done there.
Thank you. I have another question. I think what you mentioned, understanding the problem and knowing what are the needs, is the key. I think this is a very good input for our researchers. And I want to know, how do you then interact with the industry? How do you really get the information about what are the needs on the market? And how do you actually exchange this information with the industry, with big pharma, with SMEs?
Yeah, I mean, well, you have to be open and receptive. I had 2 phone calls with folks from big pharma companies right before I jumped on this call, right? They're interested, right? This is their business model, right? Their business model is not doing R&D in-house anymore, right? They're cutting their internal R&D all the time because it's just more cost efficient to go allocate the capital to some external, R&D, right, and bring it in-house, or have that external entity do the development for them on an option type of deal, let them de-risk, pay some upfront. If it works, all right, then here's some back end with a bunch of, great incentives in terms of capital, et cetera, right, to be able to allow for that. And that's the business model. So they're looking, they're actively looking and open and receptive. And I think in this, again, going back to being that expert specialist, what that niche is, your lane that you're really the expert at, I think this is where you could really, be able to begin to have those conversations with industries. What are those, 2, 3, 4 areas that you're really, really expert at, that you have great technology where you can begin to have those conversations and develop some potentially successful and or lucrative partnerships, types. I think partnerships, right? Licensing is one thing. Partnership, co-development, alliances, and collaborations are another thing. And I think they're extremely valuable. Build to buy type of startup models. There's all kinds of really innovative deal structures as well that you kind of have to be open and amenable to. And pharma is becoming increasingly, I think, open to these innovative deal structures as well. They're understanding increasingly that if they want to do earlier and earlier stage external acquisition R&D, external co-development, collaborations with that, they have to be more amenable to the licensing, to the partnership terms that are going to be required, and also to create new and innovative partnering, licensing, and co-development types of deals and terms.
Okay, thanks. Is there any question from the audience? I don't think so. Okay, then I have another question. So maybe you can give some advice also to our researchers who are, thinking of establishing a spin-out company. So what is the, how can they decide whether this is really the right path, and how to start? What's the key thing in the beginning?
Yeah, I am realizing it is noon, my time. I do have to jump to my next call here. I really apologize for that, to cut you off.
Yeah.
But I guess I talked for the full hour. I really appreciate you having me. This was fantastic. If you want to reach out, you have further questions, please let me know. I'm happy to come back and chat more. I think my email was in the beginning of the slides. Michael_Fenn at harvard.edu. Feel free to reach out. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. So let me know how I can help. Happy to. This was a lot of fun. Maybe one day I'll be able to come visit.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, right. So,
okay, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure, and have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. So we are moving into the second part where we'll have a short follow-up query for all of you. And Simona, please go ahead before we.
Yes. Do everyone see the questions now on the screen?
Yes.
Yes, do you see? Oh, great. So this is really a short follow-up question for all of you that are still remaining here. We would like to hear from you your opinions about 3 questions, and you can reply through with going on webpage www.menti.com. You can use your computer or your smartphones. And when you establish the connection to this web page, then just use code that you see here up on the upper part of the screen. So 41855, and then reply to the questions. Use one word or 5 times one word, and even if you agree with the word that has been already placed on the screen, you can reuse it, because we are making now a word cloud, and we will see the bigger the word, the more important it is. So we kindly ask you to reply. Thank you. Great. So we are now seeing that knowledge is quite important. Knowledge, community, facilities, but knowledge remains the number one, and courage. Courage is now taking the first place. Great. We are now at number 15 of responses. Since there are about 30 people here, shall we wait a little bit more for more responses? Thank you. So now we see that knowledge, courage, and capital are the top 3 necessities that we need to develop or get hands-on. Okay, I think that we will now, we have set the bar at about 17 answers. We will now move to the next question. Just a moment. Something is... Okay, the next question is, which elements that Michael talked about are, in your opinion, missing in Slovenia? You may repeat the things that we already seen in the first question. So the capital, thank you. You can reply several times. So we have now quite some answers related to funding. So it means capital ventures, financial support for researchers, VC funds, money, success stories, role models, success stories. This is another one. Yes, the network. Then we see contacts with innovative pharma companies, training and funding experience. Okay, we will wait for 2 more answers, or even more if there are more. So lack of funding programs, know-how, capital, and understanding. So again, it is knowledge, training, network, and access to funding. Thank you for all 19 that have replied. We will now go to the 3rd question, the final one. And you are also kindly invited to reply. Are you thinking about establishing a spin-out company? You have 4 possibilities.
Wow.
And those who are replied to yes and maybe, you can place you can contact us, so we will help you.
Yeah, we're expecting at least 8 emails now.
Yes. So some more replies from you. There is one, is this even possible in Slovenia? So we have one skeptic.
I mean, we have to say that this definitely is possible, and it's very much encouraged. It's just not well known. You know, we don't have as much money as what Michael was talking about, but we can give you a lot of support and a lot of love for sure.
Very nice. Okay, now we have 13 answers, but if there will be still some more, we would appreciate them, but I think that now we can wrap the follow-up for now, and I return the word to Jakob and Ursula.
Thank you very much, and let's keep this slide up because
yes,
maybe some more answers will come in. In any case, thank you everybody for joining. Just to wrap things up, as I was saying before, we don't have that much capital as what Harvard is offering, but you know, things aren't as expensive here as they are in the US. So come over to us with the TTO and the incubator, and with EIT Health. We have a lot of instruments how we can support the early stages of development, and we're especially interested in talking to researchers that would want to be, even if it's just to, you know, talk things through and see whether this is interesting for you, whether this can work out. We are here to help, right? We are here to listen to you and figure out whether there's some way we can assist you. If there are some instruments that can either provide finance or knowledge or community or role models, all of those topics that we talked about, you know, how things are missing, yes, for sure, but a lot of them can also be found if you talk to the right people, and we are very, very happy to help you out with this. You can find our contacts on our website, louis.si, and for the TTO, I'm sure Ursula will say a little bit more. And in any case, if you have any questions, LinkedIn, email, we are more than happy to, or in person, you know, we have offices open right now. It's not the best time to talk about this, but for sure we're here for you.
Thank you, Jakob. Maybe a few words from my side. So I think we saw today that, you know, you don't have to do everything on your own. So as you know, as you say, money is not a problem. So forget about that. So all we need is courage and some knowledge, and you can get all that from the mentors, from the coaches. You don't need to be everything, you know, be aware of that. And there are great people there who can really coach you, which we also found out that we had Innovator PKSE program with Mohammed Shahid, and we saw how this was useful for our researchers. So really connect to the mentors, to people who can encourage you. And of course, we are here for all the rest, help and administrative questions and everything else. So please maybe write in the chat if this event was helpful for you. So we'll know also for the future if we should stick to this form or maybe we can change something. All the feedback we get from you is very helpful. Thank you.
Usha,
yeah?
Can you hear me? Yes, Mo here. Yeah, I was listening and looking at the survey. If you have a minute, I just wanted to
sure.
make a point. I mean, it was wonderful listening to Michael, but we know that the situation is much different in US, even if you compare to the rest of Europe. So that should not be taken a sign of discouragement. And I think that's what Jakob was saying as well, that even although you are, you know, relatively small and perhaps do not have access to the same resources and everything else, one thing to remember is that all academic institutions are rich in their own particular brain power and brain talent, right? And that's where it all starts from. So the University of Ljubljana has a strong element in that. And I think one of the things that you might need to think a little bit about, and the point that Michael was raising, is the question about what is your real area of expertise and core technology. And I think that's a good question to think about going forward. But do not, all I wanted to say was don't be discouraged that you think, oh, there are so many resources, millions of dollars available to Harvard. We don't have that, and that's what you need. You do not need this. I think the whole thing starts off with a good idea, a solution for a pre-existing problem, and a desire to take that forward to application. And if you have that, I think you have the technology transfer office there as your first protocol to help you in discussing that forward. So, you know, I just wanted to emphasize that sometimes when you see what's happening in the US or in other countries, you think, oh, can we really do this? That's not what it's about. It's about actually having the courage, as someone mentioned in your survey, to go forward with your ideas and believe in yourself. And I think there's a lot of talent at the University of Ljubljana in that respect.
Thank you. Thank you. So any other comments? Are there still any people with us? Okay, yeah, still. Okay, no comments. Then I think we are ending this event. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Mo, for your comments and questions, and the rest of you as well. So, bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.